All right, so let's spend a couple of minutes on the problem. Let's ponder the problem here for a minute and say, what is our information architecture problem? What are we trying to solve? Well, I mentioned earlier we're trying to solve findability. We're trying to make it so that we can get the information into our heads and use it quicker and easier than we ever have. Said differently, this is the problem. Look at this structure. Now, this is a mine outside of Leadville, Colorado, that I took a picture of. And some guy at the top looks like he really started structuring things as best he could, right? It has a very clear vision of the guy was squaring things off, and he's putting retaining walls, and he's doing exactly what he needs to do. But as you get a little lower, a little time goes on, and you realize that things aren't quite so aligned. In the middle of this picture, you see that, well, the wall's not exactly straight, and there's some logs laying there, but they're not really lined up. And you get lower and lower, and you see less and less organization. And this is one of the things that we've got going on in our world, which is we start with a pristine idea that we'll be able to organize information, and we don't have much content there, so it organizes fairly well. But as we go further and further into the process, we need better and better skills to be able to keep our information sorted. So let me give you a different analogy, a different way of thinking about it. Okay, so this is a poem called The Cow's Path, and it's by Sam Walter Foss. And it's a great thing, and I don't want to read the whole thing. If you'd like to pause the video here and read the whole thing, you're certainly welcome to do that. But what I want to read is just the red parts, because it's the key pieces of this. And so one day through the primeval wood, a calf walked home, as good calves should, but it made a trail all bent askew, a crooked trail like all calves do. Since then 300 years have fled, and I infer this calf is dead, but still behind he left his trail, and thereon hangs my mortal tale. So the short of this block is that we had something random happen, a cow walking through the woods, and we have continued to build on that for the last 300 years. The years passed on with swiftness fleet, but the village rose, became a street, and this before the men were aware, a city's crowded thoroughfare. And soon a central street was this, in a renowned metropolis, and men 2 centuries and a half following the wanderings of this calf. So we build upon what we have, and we continue to do that, And so even though it's random, even though there's no guiding principles behind what we've done, behind the cow's path, we continue to build on it. 100,000 men were led by one poor calf, 3 centuries dead. In other words, we have these roots in the way that we organize things, and those roots may not have value, but we're still following those paths. If you in your organization have a file share or a SharePoint site or something, and it's organized by departments, or it's organized just by what seems to be random structure, that's where you're following what was a random path in the beginning. Nobody knew how to do information architecture. Nobody knew how to file things. Nobody knew how to create, because we haven't had time as a species to adapt to all of the information that we started creating. Remember, in the last 5 or 6 decades, we've so increased the amount of information that we can generate. How can we possibly process that? Let's take a look at some of these information challenges. And so there's 4 information challenges I want to take a look at. First is sensory overload. We'll talk about what that means to information overload. We'll talk about too much information, and then we'll talk about the fact that the information we do get is not the good kind. Sensory overload. Straight from Wikipedia, one or more of the senses sustained, it becomes difficult to focus on the task at hand. Or, in other words, we get too much stuff in, and we can no longer filter it out. Barry Schwartz, who wrote the book, The Paradox of Choice, says, filtering out extraneous information is one of the basic functions of consciousness. And you're doing it right now. Let me show you. So consider for a moment, what temperature is it in your office? Is it cold? Is it hot? Is it warm? Do you have a sweater on? Do you have a jacket? Are you in a t-shirt? How is it that your temperature in your office is, and how does it feel to you? What about how bright it is? I mean, surely the screen is shining at you, but do you have the lights on? Is it light pouring in through a window? So how bright is it? What about the clothes against your skin? Are you wearing jeans or slacks or sandals? How does those feel? Wait, maybe you're hungry. Maybe you're watching this video right before lunch, or maybe you're full. It's just been to a buffet and it's right after. What about being tired? Did you get a full night's sleep last night, or are you kind of dragging along because you didn't? Now, my point with all of that is that stuff is happening to you right this moment. Whatever you felt, whenever I went there and you started thinking about it, that stuff is happening to you. Well, what if you couldn't ignore all of that stuff? It'd make it awfully hard to get anything done. Well, so information overload is the difficulty a person can have understanding an issue and making decisions because of the presence of too much information, or more precisely, too much uncoordinated information. You've got too much going on and you can't put it into neat little buckets. Gary Klein, who wrote Sources of Power, talks about the fact that you can only hold so many objects in your brain at a time. You can only run a mental model. You can only simulate with so many things. And until you can group into those small number of things, you won't be able to function. We like to think about the human brain as it's a computer, but in reality, most of the human brain is a hard drive. It's a memory recall device. So when we have conflicting information, we create a problem for the retrieval of that information. Let's take a look at how much information we're talking about. I know these are rather old statistics, but bear with me for a minute because they show the problem. In 2007, there were 281 exabytes, million terabytes, of information created. 15.2 trillion pages printed worldwide. Yeah, so much for a paperless office. I don't know about your office, but mine's got a lot of paper in it. The paradox of choice, Barry Schwartz says that the average American sees 3,000 ads per day. Right? In 2010, there were 171 billion pieces of direct mail handled by the United States Postal Service, and an estimated 321 billion email messages received. I only received like 2 billion of those, so I think the rest of you had the rest of them. A lot of spam, but this is the kind of information that we are talking about processing about. Exabytes and billions and trillions of stuff that is happening. The trick is that most of it is not the good kind. 53% of people believe that less than half the information they receive is valuable. Most people don't believe the stuff they get is valuable. 28% of the typical workday is wasted by unnecessary interruptions. By the way, if your email little notification pop-up is turned on, do you need that? That's the kind of thing. And the phone calls that you get and the person walking by and asking you about fantasy football or whatever, well, maybe those aren't necessary. But the point is you get all these interruptions and you waste quite a bit of your day. And by the way, if you're interested more in understanding the wasted day with interruptions, take a look at Flow by Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi. Really good information about how we can be productive and how we can't be productive when we're getting interrupted. Basics, which is a source for these stats, says that $650 billion of productivity are lost due to this information overload problem. And one of the things that social's doing is it's making this worse. We're starting to see things like Twitter and Yammer and all these different services and all of the Facebook news feeds and all that stuff is just inundating us with information. Well, what's the solution to that? Well, the solution is to leverage out of training and learning design. Information design is the skill and practice of preparing information so to use it efficiently and effectively. Okay, fine. I love Wikipedia because it's okay. They're decent definitions. But what this really means is when an author writes a book or when a speaker creates a presentation, we're absolutely looking at how do we make it easier for someone to learn from it? What order do we put them in? How do we organize the topics so that they build on one another rather than just being random pieces of content that you have no framework to put them on? So what's the solution to information? And the answer is information architecture. Now, I like to say that it's the process for creating a structure and tools for information such that it can be stored, retrieved, and managed efficiently and effectively. Now, I tell you that that's my definition. It's the one that I use because it works. It talks about findability, that you can retrieve the information. It talks about putability, the ability to store information. The other thing about information architecture is it relies on compromise. In most cases, we have to make a decision between A or B, between the creator and the consumer. While we can cheat with some technology pieces, we can't always cheat, and we need to figure out how to strike the balance between the competing interests. Okay, so just take a look at these factors. Now, there are 3 factors: people, process, and technology. And people, we're looking at their fears. Hey, you moved my cheese, you moved my stuff, it's going to be hard for me to find. Process. These are the patterns. These are the, where does it go? Where does the output end up? How do I connect the dots and make sure that it all flows together in one big system? Technology. Technology is all about feasibility. There's lots of times when we'll go into information architectures and it becomes, and then the magic happens. Whenever you have a "and then the magic happens" kind of box, that is a bad thing. It means we don't know how to do it yet, and it may not even be possible. It's like, can I make a submarine fly? Well, I have no idea, but it sounds like a kind of wacky idea. So our goal here is to look at all of the factors that are involved in information architecture and try to get to the point where we are putting them in the appropriate balance. Last point here is findability. It is, how do we get to content? Now, whether it's search or whether it's navigation, I want to figure out, how do I get to the information? And a lot of times, consistency is key. Our goal is, how do we get to the right terms? How do we get to terms that are exactly the ones that we want? And how do we enforce people using those terms? Or how do we coalesce the data? How do we move it, migrate it, frame it so that it's the same thing? So that's it for the information problem. Let's take a look at our next step in the next module.